Hello and welcome to this special episode of Naval Action, and in today's, as you can see by looking at this, a beautiful Endymion armed with Carronades. Yes, I will be talking about two types of naval armament back in the Age of Sail, and also we'll take a little bit examination of how they're being used. We are, just for the record, facing an Agamemnon here, which I think is a fourth rate in our Endymion, and our Endymion is packed with the top caliber carronade, so it's a beast. Now, I will be using two different engagements, but I will be using more or less the same ship, Endymion with carronades and Endymion with long guns, because I want to take a brief discussion. So anyway, let's first start with the carronades, given that this Endymion is packed with carronades, as you can tell. So, first of all, in history, a carronade was considered a short, smooth-bore cast-iron cannon which was used by the Royal Navy. It was first produced by the Carron Company, an ironworks in Falkirk, Scotland, and it was used in the 1770s and to the 1850s. Its main function was to serve as a powerful, short-range anti-ship and anti-crew weapon. The technology behind the carronade was greater dimensional precision, with the shot fitting more closely in the barrel, thus transmitting more propellant charge energy to the projectile, allowing a lighter gun using less gunpowder to be effective. Carronades were initially found to be very successful, but eventually disappeared as naval artillery advanced, with the introduction of rifling and consequent charge in the shape of the projectile, exploding shells replacing solid shot, and naval engagements being fought through at longer ranges. Okay, that's a little bit too close of an engagement. Yeah, and I did take a little bit of beating, but he took a decent portion of the beating too, Mr. Baldwin Lind. So, initially, the carronade, and you're gonna see actually a picture here. I took up some pictures of carronades when I was in the old Ironsides in Boston. So I was actually visiting the USS Constitution, as you can see on the picture-in-picture, top right corner. Yes, so I actually saw it, and I saw these carronades, and they were actually, they look much shorter, and they are very, very, very different looking than the regular naval cannons. But that's actually a good thing, because historically the carronades were much lighter than the original cannons, especially of the same caliber. However, you will see that a lot of the ships back in the days, especially, for example, the old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, used to have carronades on its spar deck. And that was pretty much typical for the armament during the period. And if we were talking now Constitution, she had a total of roughly 50 guns. She was rated as a 44-gun frigate, but she often carried more than 50 guns. And when she had on the lower deck, she had the long 24-pounder cannons, and I'm going to be talking about the longs just a little bit later in this video. But on the top deck, she had, on this, also called the spar deck, she had 22 guns, which were all a 32-pounder carronade. And those are the ones that we're basically using here in this engagement. I don't know exactly if these are 32-pounders, but they're massive. However, the reason why the bigger caliber could be used, because if you think about, for example, 24-pounder cannon weighing approximately, or a long gun weighing approximately 3 tons, carronades would be 1/4 of it, or even less, which means that they were easily mountable on the top decks, and they were and they packed a much bigger shot, thus inflicting a lot more damage. Also, a couple of interesting things about the Carronades is they actually had a hollow shot. So more likely than not, the actual ball being used was hollow. And this will also contributed to the little bit less of weight. However, also the Carronades had much less charge riled into its gun muzzle, and therefore they were still being devastating, they were still accurate. However, they weren't able to fire as distant as and they weren't effective at greater ranges because they couldn't, throw that far, to be honest. However, at close range, which was basically as the majority of the naval battles of the era was fought, they were devastating. And they could pack much more damage than the long guns just because of their bigger caliber. And as we said, given that they were much lighter, you could mount them also on the spar deck. For example, you could mount on the spar deck either like 6-pounder, 9-pounder cannons or 12 or 24-pounder carronades. So much bigger caliber, and yes, and they also had a secondary use. If you think about it, I want you to think of carronade as basically almost like a shotgun or something like that, because it's up close, it's devastating, but at a larger range it will do jack absolutely. And as you can see, I'm firing all my carronades, and just look how I'm melting armor on the Baldwin Lind on that Agamemnon. So that's a little bit about the history of the carronades. However, when we're talking about using them in naval action, that's pretty much similar usage. So as you can see, my Endymion is completely decked out with carronades, which means I intended her as a brawler, coming close, getting in there and delivering damage, and more often than not getting out. So when do you want to use carronades in naval action? You want to use them obviously when you're fighting a bigger ship, a larger ship, which you can outmaneuver or outsail, or just, get in, deliver the blow and get out. What the carronades will achieve is that they will deliver greater damage, and they will allow you to basically wear down the enemy quicker. Also, if you're playing against higher tiered ship or higher rated ship, you also want to try stern raking, because you're more maneuverable. You can get yourself in a position where you can actually perform a stern rake, and with a carronade shot with that kind of caliber, historically the enemy ships or any ship would have much less armor on their stern. So if you would stern rake, the cannon balls or carronade balls would be traveling throughout the whole length of the ship, tipping cannons, delivering splinters, killing the crew and whatnot. So basically the typical usage of carronade is up close and either go for the waterline to create holes and leaks, or try to go for the stern rake, thus killing crew, damaging structure and whatnot. So as you can see, with this Agamemnon, I have taken less damage. However, and also I'm turning at a shallow angle to her. Now I'm gonna go and try to see if I can pull off a stern rake. Then again, I would be turning a little bit too much into the wind, so maybe I won't do that. And as she is passing me, maybe I will be able to pull off a stern rake, which would be beautiful. Well, I'm almost at the end of the range, so this is not ideal. Let's fire and see if we manage to get some shots in. Okay, a couple of shots in the captain's cabin, not too shabby. This is actually about as far as you can hit with carronades, so as you can see, very short range, but you have to be careful how you use them. For example, if I was to fire carronades at this point, it would be a waste of shots, so really no point. Alright, so that's a little bit enough when we are talking about carronades. Now, if we go and start talking about the long naval guns, the long naval guns were typically cannons, but just a little bit, longer than the regular cannons. And what that would achieve is that the ball exiting would have a little bit higher muzzle velocity, which means it would travel faster, it would travel a bit more in the straight line versus the carronade's ballistic arc, and it would have greater penetration. However, given the sheer size of the shot, it would have much less shot, so it would be delivering less damage, but it would still, penetrate and do damage. So now I'm gonna be switching over to the fight where I have Endymion with the long cannons, as you can see packed here. So here in this engagement we have Endymion, which is a beauty, all packed with long cannons, and I think, yeah, this is decked out completely with longs. So long cannons are a bit more, heavy, bulkier, and also when you're sailing with your ships, it will actually show that. It will really feel heavier, it will feel bulkier. However, it would basically have much longer range and increased piercing power. So, in naval action, when do you want to be using long cannons? Just look at them. They're beautiful. Well, long cannons I personally would use when I want to have a more strategic rather than brawling engagement. And the strategic engagement you want to have when you're a single ship versus two smaller ships. And in that case, what you want to be is you want to be out of their arc of fire as much as possible, few brawls aside. However, you want to keep them at range and you want to just pepper them constantly with a hail of cannonballs. So that would be kind of my tactic when you're fighting multiple ships, which could be same rated as you or slightly higher, but not too much higher because the weight of your shot will not penetrate. And also you have to take into account that, for example, this is Belle Poole. She has an angled hull, which means if I try to not, go at 90 degrees angles, the cannonballs might bounce off her hull. So I'm actually gonna here brawl with the longs, which is not your typical maneuver what you want to do. Fire. As you can see, only moderate damage, not really great, but we needed to pass, and they didn't do that much damage against me because my Andy is a beast. Big kudos to Kit Talon for providing and building this ship for me. She is a beauty, mate, and I love sailing with her. Anyway, so as you can tell, now what I plan to be doing, I plan to turn to larboard and I plan to just start brawling with it. However, I've noticed quickly enough that we cannot go to larboard, otherwise I would end up in irons. So I decided to pull off, a complete turn maneuver while I have the speed. And that would basically allow me to utilize a strategy that I envisaged. And that's basically keep them at range and just pepper them with cannonballs as much as I can. So, if you're asking me what are the upsides and the downsides of fighting with long versus the carronades, that is actually depends on the ship that you're using. That depends on the type of the enemies that you're fighting, whether it's humans, if it's bots, or if it's something else, and also how many of them are you facing. The more the enemies you have, the more that you want to use longs, because cannonballs don't do much damage at range. However, if you're pretty accurate and you know what you're doing, you can actually damage them quite significantly still. So as you can see here, I'm coming at an angle, but I'm actually pretty confident that I can still fire. See that? Now look at that amount of damage done. That's just crazy. So now I know that I cannot outmaneuver her, because I mean, Endymion is a maneuverable ship, it's a Ferrari, but still, she can take some punishment. Now, as you can see, I made a mistake. I fired off my starboard broadside into the other enemy when I could have gone for a second stern rake on the Valpool. That would have been a much more, you know, how would you say, much more devastating. Yes, that's the word that I'm looking for. So, yeah, to actually pull this video to a close, final thoughts. I'm not going to show the entire video. I will be airing both of those fights separately. So what you want to be doing is, if you're fighting a same class ship or inferior ships and multiple of them, I would suggest using longs, unless you're going, you know, with a 6th rate or 7th rate. If you're going 5th rate, or even better 4th rate and above, I would suggest using longs and keeping on a strategic level of engagement. However, if you have a very nimble ship that is very fast, very maneuverable and stuff, in that case you might want to consider using the Carronades as a brawler. You just have to be really careful not to get hit when you're coming in. And typically you want to use Carronades if you're fighting a higher tier ship and get in close, and use your superior maneuverability to actually pull it off. So that pretty much puts this to the end of the discussion. I'm just gonna go and quickly show you one final downside of using Carronades in naval action, and this is actually a spoiler alert, because I'm going to show the resolution of the fight with my ship in Carronades. So I suggest that you, if you don't want to get it spoiled, I suggest that you stop watching now, and I wish you all the best. However, another downside of fighting with Carronades is that you can get yourself into trouble. And as you can see, I'm going here to resolve this battle once and for all, and if you want to see how it plays out, well, you'll have to watch the next video of Naval Action. Till then, I thank you very much for watching. Like if you like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. This is GrunfWorks, signing off.